Welcome to today's live session. I'm Ria Pramanik. Today, we are continuing with our course code, that is BPSC 144. Uh, the course code is about introduction to South Asia. So we started our this paper, this subject particularly from the last session, and we are continuing this, and we are going to know about South Asia in this whole process. So we completed Unit 1 in the last session. Now today, also in the last session, we completed half of Unit 2, but we only did till the India. So we read about the struggle for independence and nationalism in South Asia, particularly in India in our last session. Today we will continuing with all other South Asian countries. We will get to know about their struggle for independence and how nationalism uh, saw a rise in these South Asian lands. Additionally, we will be completing our Unit 3 today as well, that is diversity and pluralism in South Asia. So, here in this Unit 3, we will be talking about how the South Asian countries are so diverse in nature and how pluralism exists in these countries. So, this is a very important and very vast unit, and everyone should pay attention to this. Why? Because this will help us know all the details of the countries, how they evolved, how they came into being, what were their histories, how they come to this position in today's time. So all these things are related to their struggle for independence and how the diversity plays a big role in their socio-economic and political structures. So let's start with today's session. So I'm starting with Unit 2, that is the struggle for independence and nationalism in South Asia. We completed the Indian struggle for independence and nationalism in our previous session, as I told you. Today we will be completing all the other countries which comes under South Asian region. So, the first country we will be talking about today is the freedom struggle in South Asia, basically the country Pakistan. So, we will be learning how Pakistan saw the struggle, what were the happenings was going on at that point of time, how they felt, how they faced that situation, because these things will make us understand the base why Pakistan is such, why Pakistan became like that. All these questions will be answered if we know what happened to Pakistan since their independence. So, we will be learning about this in the entire process. So, let's start. So, the origin and the struggle for Pakistan lie in the communal politics of pre independent India. So, the want or the demand for a separate country, that is Pakistan, it lies with the communal politics that was going on in India before the partition. So there were several developments that occurred, and the major developments during the national movement was the rise and growth of communalism. Communalism basically, we will be learning about Bipin Chandra's idea of communalism. It is basically hatred and differences in religious ideology. So we will be learning what Bipin Chandra said about communalism, that consists of three stages. So what are these stages? The first stage is the communal ideology starts when persons or groups believe that people of the same religion have common socio-economic interest. So, how communal ideology develops? The first stage of this is a belief, uh, a sense when people used to believe that the same religion have a common socio-economic interest, and they are different from the other because the same religion have same kind of interest and ideas. The second stage comes when a person or a group believes that different religion based communities have their own special interest. So first of all, we started thinking like in our religion all of us have a common interest. Secondly, we started believing that all different communities have their own special interest. And then comes the final stage when the religious differences converted into secular differences and are seen as incompatible with each other. When we started feeling incompatible, then this kind of communal ideology or communal politics came into being, when we feel that we can't stay together because we have separate ideas, we have different interests, and we differs from others. So in the context of India till 1930, communal ideology of reconciliation and accommodation was prevalent. So during 1940s, this communal ideology reached its extremist form of a separate nation, resulting in the partition of the country. So the idea was growing, it was a gradual process, but since the time came in the 1940s decade, it reached to such an extent that there was a need for a separate nation, there was a demand for a separate nation, which ultimately resulted in the partition of this big country, that is India, before that. So, prospects of Hindu Muslim unity became bright when all parties boycotted the Simon Commission and decided to formulate an all parties constitution. So, now we will be looking at the events that occurred before India got independence, and Pakistan also got independence. So, before the partition, before the division of these countries and the forming of a new new identities on their own. So in this we will be learning what were the events that took place, which resulted in this partition. So prospects of Hindu Muslim unity became bright when all parties boycotted the Simon Commission. So, all the parties that existed during the freedom struggle, they boycotted the Simon Commission, and they decided that they will be formulating an all parties constitution and not a separate one. So, since the demands put forth by the leader of the Muslim League, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, were not met at the conference, so he virtually parted ways with the Congress. And after this, Muslim groups joined bands and put forth a single document known as Jinnah's 14-point program. So this was the events that was happening, and how Muslims, basically Muslim groups, they joined the Jinnah's, the movement. So it became the basis for any other further discussion for the future of India. So this Jinnah's 14-point program played a very crucial role in shaping the future of India. So during the roundtable conferences, no decision could be reached because the uncompromising attitude of the League. So the Muslim League that was led by Muhammad Ali Jinnah, there was a demand, there was a particular demand, and when it was not met, so the attitude of the League was very uncompromising, and this led to no decision to be taken to reach a consensus. So, and when these happenings were going on in the ongoing freedom struggle, when there were differences in parties, there were differences in ideas and ideologies, to add fuel to the fire, the British government, through communal award, accepted almost all that was demanded in the Jinnah's 14-point program. So, to add fuel to the fire that was already burning at that point of time because of the differences, these two, basically all the communities that existed at that point of time, what British government did, they started with a communal award, and they also accepted all the demands that was there in Jinnah's 14-point program, which further deteriorated the condition. So from 1930 onwards, a section of Muslim intelligentsia began to think in terms of a separate independent Muslim state in India. So it was in the 1930s when this idea of a separate nation, separate identity for Muslims, separate country for them, it started becoming came in mind. It started came in mind in the Muslim intelligentsias at that point of time. So Muhammad Iqbal, who presided over the 1930 session of the Muslim League, said, "I would like to see Punjab northwestern frontier province, Sindbad Baluchistan amalgamated into a single state. So, in the session of 1930, the presiding leader of Muslim League said that he wanted to see a state, a region, on an area which comprises of these particular areas like Punjab, NWFP, that is Northwest Frontier Province, Sindbad, Baluchistan, to become a single state, a separate state. At the Round Table Conference, a group of Muslim students in England, led by Rahmat Ali, proposed a Muslim state named as Pakistan. So all these things were happening, they were going on in the background of Indian freedom struggle. So the idea of living together as a single nation began to be replaced by the politics of hatred, fear, and separation. So when there was a ongoing struggle for a independent state, for an independent country, at that point of time there was no single nations idea, but a separated one, divided one. So the League propounded the two nation theory. This two nation theory is very famous because it was the basis of the partition of India. It played a very crucial role. So they also passed a resolution, struggle for independence, and demanding the creation of independent states for Muslim in the northwestern and nationalism in South Asian parts of India. So all these things was going on. So the League fought the 1945-46 election on the ground that a vote for the League and Pakistan was a vote for Islam. So they started awareness programs, and they started their own advertisements, or you can say they started mobilizing people by saying that if you vote for League, you are voting for Islam. If you vote for League in Pakistan, you are voting for Islam. So this was something that was their motto at that point of time, and League was doing that during the 1945-46 elections. So, winning 440 of the 495 seats reserved for Muslims, the League established itself as the dominant party among the Muslims. So, they won 440 seats out of 495. That is a very huge number. And all these seats were reserved for Muslims. And after the winning, the League started establishing itself as a dominant party among the Muslim population. So Jinnah declared that there could be no compromise on the issue of Pakistan. So this was the time when the issue of Pakistan and the demand for Pakistan was at its peak. So in August, Jinnah had called for direct action for the creation of Pakistan. So the following months witnessed the worst ever communal riots between the two communities. That is basically Hindus and Muslims, and also Sikhs were very they were also a part of it, because Punjab comprises of the largest number of Sikhs at that point of time, and also Punjab was going to be divided into two nations. So that is why it was a communal riot, including the Hindus, the Muslims, and the Sikhs. Basically Hindus and Muslims, because they are more in number. So it started from Bengal also. So Bengal was going to be divided into two parts. One part will remain with India, and the other part will become a part of the Pakistan, and specifically East Pakistan, which later became Bangladesh. So it started from Bengal, Bihar, and United Provinces, but it also reached Delhi and culminating in Punjab. So this communal rights was not only kept in a particular state, but it was expanding over the areas. So, thus, the communal divide ultimately led to the political divide and the creation of Pakistan. So, this communalism or this communal riots resulted in the creation of a separate nation, that is Pakistan, specifically devoted to the Muslims. So this was all about Pakistan's struggle, what were they were facing, how they got independence, and how Muslim League played a very crucial role in their independence. Now we will be moving forward to know about Bangladesh, how Bangladesh came into being, and how all the things unfolded over the period of time, and Bangladesh became a separate nation by dividing Pakistan. So Bangladesh was part of a Pakistan. As I told you, that the part of Bengal that went to Pakistan area, that part, again after a very tough war, they got independence from Pakistan as well. So it was created. The Bangladesh was created on the demand that the Muslims are a nation and therefore must have a separate homeland and a state of their own. So initially, when Bangladesh was not Bangladesh but the part of East Pakistan, it was known as East Pakistan. It was created on the demand that the Muslims are a nation in itself and therefore they must have a separate homeland. So after Pakistan's creation, however, Bengalis came to develop an increasing sense of distinctiveness. So what happened is, Pakistan was at two sides of India. At In the west part, it was known as Western Pakistan. In the east, it was known as East Pakistan. But they were very far from each other, and they have a distinctive diversity in these two parts. The western part basically were the Urdu and Punjabi speakers who dominated at that point of time, including there were many other languages and also ethnicities. Whereas in the eastern part, the most number of people used to live there were Bengalis, the Bengali Muslims. So after the creation of Pakistan, Bengalis in the East Pakistan, they started developing an increasing sense of distinctiveness. This prevented the development of a single nation community. So because of these differences, because of this distinctiveness, these two countries these two parts of Pakistan was unable to develop a feeling of a single nation community. So it was this estrangement that culminated in the secessionist movement, as a result of which Bangladesh ceased to be its constituent part. So there was a secessionist movement because of all these differences and all these problems that East Pakistan was facing. So increase in Bengali nationalism in Pakistan was the decision of the ruling government of Pakistan to introduce Urdu as the national language of Pakistan in disregard of Bengali wishes. So what happened is, the ultimate uh, reason for this secessionist movements and this revolution was that the Pakistan, basically all the decision makers, all the leaders, all the political leaders, they were part of the West Pakistan, and very rarely the East Pakistan was seen and East Pakistan was handled very rarely, and there was no particular development practices that was going on in East Pakistan, whereas West Pakistan was dominating towards the East Pakistan. But the ultimate reason for the problem that started arising in East Pakistan was because of the decision taken by the West Pakistani leaders about the implementation of national language, and that will be the Urdu. So they decided the national language to be the Urdu. But what happened is, the East Pakistanis language was Bengali, and they were not a handful of people but a huge population that speak Bengali. So just to make national language Urdu, which is not spoken by half of the population, almost approximately, that was very much not taken in a good sense by the East Pakistanis. So Bengalis saw it as an attempt at cultural intrusion, and different strata of population came out to protest this decision. So the decision of Pakistan to make Urdu as a national language was not accepted by the people who spoke Bengali. So there was a protest because of this decision. So police action to disperse demonstrating students, leading to the death of some individuals, intensified Bengali hostility towards the West Pakistan. So who were in the forefront of this protest? It was basically the students, and there was many deaths also happened because of these protests and police actions, and this ultimately intensified the Bengali hostility towards the West Pakistan more now. So, the most significant impact of the language movement was the 1954 general elections held under the limited franchise. So, the party who was leading this protest was the Awami League. So, the Awami Muslim League that had emerged under the leadership of Bhashani in 1949 and other Bengali parties came together to form a united front. So they demanded, among others, autonomy for East Pakistan and adoption of Bengali as one of the state languages. So they decisively defeated the Muslim League in East Pakistan. So during the elections, this party they defeat the Muslim League, which was a very popular and very dominating party in Pakistan since independence, because it existed before independence also. So the third phase of the struggle was the election of the 1970, the first general elections conducted since independence. So the election was very important for Pakistan because after independence, in many times, Pakistan came into the control of the military ruler, and that is why the democratically elections were a very big concern for Pakistan, because it was happening for the first time in the year 1970. Almost 23 years it took to get it done. So, the Awami League not only swept the provincial assembly polls but also succeeded in securing a majority in the National Assembly because of the larger population of the Eastern Wing. So, this Awami League was becoming very popular and very powerful in the East Pakistan part. So, when the military started assaulting the Bengali nationalists, the civil disobedience and non-cooperation movement turned into armed struggle. So this was all things happening in East Pakistan in the year 1970s. So India provided sanctuary and training facilities to the freedom fighter of East Pakistan. And the reason behind was there was a huge number of migration that was taking place in East Pakistan because of all these police actions and armed rebellions and all this political instability that was happening in the wake of the liberation struggle of East Pakistan from the West Pakistan part. So many people who used to live in East Pakistan, they started migrating, and the India is the closest one because India shares a border with East Pakistan, and that was the reason why the migrants used to migrate to India, which was becoming a very big concern for the Indian government. Why? Because India was also a newly independent country which was going through a very tough and a rough process of getting all the things established and stabilized. So, at that point of time, when India was facing internal problems because of the newly all the things that happened for the first time to India, how India was not able to cope with the coming up of migrants, because there was already a huge population that lives in India, and to cater the migrant workers in lakhs and lakhs of numbers was not possible and was not accepted by the local population of India as well. So, because of these problems that India was facing, it started helping the East Pakistanis for their liberation, because if they got liberated from the West Pakistan, they will establish their own new country, and for that, the migration will be stopped. So, India, what they did, India provided the training facilities to the freedom fighters of East Pakistan, and besides, it mounted a massive diplomatic offensive to bring to the notice of the world the genocide in the Bangladesh and its liberation struggle. So finally, Pakistan spelled its own doom by declaring war on India on 3rd December. Why? Because it blamed India for the all the things happened in East Pakistan. It blamed that it is because of India that East Pakistanis are revolting against the West Pakistan. So the armed struggle ended on 16th of December 1971. So the Pakistani army surrendered to the joint command of the Bangladesh Liberation Army and Indian Army in Dhaka nowadays. So Bangladesh emerged as a sovereign independent nation after this. So this was the freedom struggle that Bangladesh was facing. Now we will be talking about Sri Lanka. The political history of Ceylon, Sri Lanka was earlier known as Ceylon, which later came to be known as Sri Lanka, can be traced back to the 3rd century BC. So, Sri Lanka is a very old country and like India. So, we can trace back the political history of Ceylon or Sri Lanka back to the 3rd century BC. So, in the 12th century, the Sinhala king Parakram Bahu I unified the whole country. So, after his death, the country plunged into disorder and chaos, which attracted the invaders from South India. So it was these invasions which culminated in the formation of a Tamil kingdom in the Jaffna Peninsula in the north of the island. So because of all these invaders who came from South India to the Ceylon at that point of time, it culminated into the formation of a Tamil kingdom in the Jaffna area. So when the Portuguese arrived in the late 16th century, Ceylon was divided into 3 independent kingdoms. So among these, 2 were Sinhalese, one based on Kotte with control over the south and east of the island, and the other at Kandy ruling the central highlands. The third was the Tamil kingdom, which controlled the north and eastern part. So this gave them ample opportunities to intervene in the Ceylonese politics and raise their settlements in the coastal region. So in the mid-17th century, Dutch traders came in Ceylon who were supported by the Sinhalese. So do remember that there are 2 ethnic communities, Sinhalese and Tamils in Sri Lanka, and they played a very important role in the politics that happened in later part of Sri Lanka. So do remember the 2 groups, that is Sinhalese and Tamils. So when such of the interior remained independent under the Kandyan kings, the British displaced the Dutch in the year 1796. So from 1796 we can see how Britishers came, there was an advent of Britishers in the Sri Lankan land. This is very important point, that how Tamil state in Sri Lanka was abolished by the Britishers and made it into a crown colony. So in the economic sphere, the British abolished all state monopolies, did away with the Rajakarya system that used to happen in Sri Lanka, and they promoted free trade. So they also encouraged plantation agriculture by selling crown land cheaply. So as a result, production of cinnamon, pepper, sugarcane, cotton, and coffee flourished because of all these practices done by the Britishers. So the labor on the coffee plantation was predominantly the immigrants from India. So they used to migrate these Indians for the coffee plantations work as a labor. So this was all thing going on in the British time. So forces of nationalism gathered momentum during the First World War. So the growth of national political consciousness in Sri Lanka was aided by the political repression that followed the civil disturbances in the 1950s. So when the British arrested prominent Sinhalese leaders during what was then a minor communal riot, leaders of all communities came to oppose the move. So the British government was under pressure, and because of that, there was a decline of the world trade after the World War I. So there was also a rise in prices of the imported goods, including the foodstuffs, and heightened working class activity, which ultimately promulgated a new constitution in the year 1920. So it provided for an elected majority in the legislature, and also increase in the number of territorially elected members and the election of a communal representatives. Thus, the representative government came into being in Ceylon. So with this, there was a representative government that started taking place. So following these reforms, there was a breakdown of the Sinhalese and the Tamil harmony of interest, which is a very important part to notice, because these 2 communities, as I already told you, played a very important role in the socio-political and economic changes that happened in the later part of the 20th century. So while the Sinhalese leader wanted to do away with the communal representation and make territorial representation universal, whereas on the other hand, the minorities desire to retain this communal representation to secure power for their communities. So in this context, the Tamils began to regard itself as a minority community in Sri Lanka. So, the growing national movement in India and the introduction of adult franchisee further augmented the national movement in Sri Lanka. And it is very important to know that the Sri Lankan transfer of power from Britishers to the Sri Lankan population was a very smooth and peaceful process, unlike India and Pakistan. So, the reflection of the moderate tone of the dominant strand in the country's national movement, and there was no bitterness or division at the time of independence, as in the case of India. So, it made the whole process rather bland. So, independence was granted from above and lacked the active spirit of nationalism. So, because in the struggle in Sri Lanka was very smooth and peaceful, there was a lack of active spirit of nationalism in the country. So, with this, let's move forward to Nepal, how Nepal came into being. So, for much of its early history, Nepal was divided into a number of independent principalities. So, there were many number of principalities in Nepal, and the present borders of Nepal came into being after the war with the British rulers in 1814. So, this was the boundary that we are seeing today. It came into being after the war with the Britishers. So, Nepal lost a considerable amount of territory to the British India, but it gained British recognition of its sovereignty. So there was a very long history of Nepal also, who lost the amount of territory to the British India during the colonial period. So even though Nepal was never occupied by the British, it was rarely in a position to assert its complete independence. So Britishers never directly ruled Nepal, but there was some kind of influence over it. So when India became independent, Nepal too declared its independent status. So the reform movements in India and the rise of national movement under the Indian National Congress deeply influenced the middle classes who lived in Nepal. Let's move forward to Bhutan. So Bhutan is a hilly and a mountainous country. Also, one thing to remember: this Nepal and Bhutan, they are landlocked nations. I discussed about this in our previous session as well. Again, I'm repeating that when you say that a country is a landlocked, it means that it is not. It doesn't have any sea or ocean do the to do business, and merchant navies can neither be there. So there is a problem that these countries faces, and they require some kind of exposure to the sea and ocean to do their business and marketing and gain revenue. So these two countries take help of India to reach the sea. So let's come back to Bhutan. So Bhutan was divided into several small principalities until the 17th century. So when India was on the verge of independence, the Bhutanese government was apprehensive that the new Indian government was likely to interfere in the internal affairs of Bhutan. So there was a fear in Bhutan that Indian government will interfere in their internal matters. So they wanted to have some kind of relation with the British government in London so that India could not interfere. So they tried to retain their relation with the British government. So India undertook not to interfere in the internal administration of Bhutan, while Bhutan agreed to be guided by the advice of India in its external relation. So this is a very important point and very important thing to understand and notice in the India-Bhutan relationship. So earlier there was a fear in Bhutan that India will interfere because India is one of the largest country in this region, and they wanted to have a good relation with British government, who in return will oversee that whether India is interfering it or not. But later, India agreed that they will not interfere in their internal matters, whereas Bhutan promised and agreed that it will be guided by India in its external relations. So this is a India-Bhutan relation. Now let's move towards Maldives. Maldives is an island country. Island, we can call it an island when it is covered by the water from all the four sides. So Maldives is an island country, whereas Bhutan and Nepal is a landlocked country. So there is a difference. So the early history of Maldives is obscure. The early settlers here were probably from southern India. So whoever are living in Maldives nowadays are basically and approximately more South Indians than other communities. So originally they were Buddhist, but Maldivian were converted to Sunni Islam in the mid of 12th century. So basically they were Buddhists, but they converted in the 12th or mid 12th century into Sunni Islam. Since then, Maldives has been governed as an Islamic sultanate for most of its history. So because Maldivian converted into Islam at that point of time, nowadays also and starting from if you trace back their history, you will find that Maldives has been governed as an Islamic sultanate. So, for the first time in its history, the Maldives came under direct control of foreign power when the Portuguese occupied the northern island in 1553. So, for the very first time, it was in 1553 when foreign power and basically the Portuguese they occupied the Maldivian land. So, Sultan later concluded a treaty with the Portuguese which restricted their independence. So Maldives was forced to send a fixed annual tribute to the Portuguese in Ceylon. So Portuguese were there also in Ceylon, nowadays Sri Lanka, and also they were there in Maldives. So the Maldivians started giving a fixed annual tribute to the Portuguese living in Ceylon. So, knowing the strategic importance of the island as well as to protect trade conducted by the British subject, in 1887, the governor of Ceylon signed an agreement with the Sultan. So, by this agreement, Great Britain formally recognized Maldives as its protectorate. Protectorate in the sense when we can call it a protectorate when you take care of the external affairs of a particular country, you will be consulted. So, that is how countries became the protectorate towards other countries. So, Maldives remained a British Crown protectorate until 1953 when the Sultanate was suspended and the first republic was declared under the presidency of Muhammad Amin Didi. So, it was in the year 1953 when Maldives become they rejected or they suspended the Sultanate system that used to exist since a very long time in their history, and it was declared a republic under the presidency of Muhammad Amin Didi. So the political developments in the Maldives since then have been largely influenced by the British military present in the island. So there were many countries, there was a presence of many countries in Maldives from European lands. So earlier it was Portuguese, then Britain also came there. So the British government retained the use of gun and hitadu facilities. So in March 1968, the Sultanate was abolished by a national referendum. So there was a referendum which decided the abolishment of the Sultanate system. So Maldives became a republic in November 1968 under the presidency of Ibrahim Nasir. So this was how Maldives fought for their struggle, how they overthrown or not overthrown, but they abolished by consensus the Sultanate system. So this was our unit 2 where we talked about how these countries faced the freedom struggle or how these countries were have a common history of colonialism that also united them because all of these countries were under some kind or directly under the colonial rule. So these countries fought for their independence and they became an independent country after a very big struggle. Now we will be moving forward to unit 3 that talks about the diversity and pluralism in South Asia. So to introduce this unit, let's talk about what does diversity means and why we are calling it pluralism. What does it mean? So diversity is the law of nature whose civilizational manifestation is most visible in the patterns of plurality across the globe. So when we were very young, we were learning about singular and plural. So what does singular mean? Means one, whereas plural is the term used for something which is more than one. So when we are talking about plurality, that means there are more than one. More than one, it can be religion, more than one language. There are multiple languages that exist together. So this is what plurality means when there are population which have multiple identities. So among the various continents and subcontinents on this planet, the range and scale of diversity and pluralism in South Asia is unmistakably astounding. So the variety, the diversity, the pluralism we can find in this region is no doubt is astounding in nature. So this diversity is rooted in the vast size and spatial distinctiveness of different constituent units of the subcontinent. So why this diversity is there? Because South Asia is a region where you can find different kind of geographical location, different kinds of spatial arrangements. So this is the reason why there is such a diverse population that lives here. So it is also in the civilizational march that underpinned the socio-cultural evolutionary framework of this region. So moreover, the close interaction of the region with other parts of the world helped in rise, growth, and consolidation of this diversity and plurality in South Asia. So this connection with the other parts of the world also played a very huge role in the diversity and pluralism. So South Asia thus presents a mosaic underlined by social, economic, political, spatial, cultural, racial, religious, lineage, climatic, culinary, customary, and linguistic legacies and preferences of the people. So all these different, you can say, identities are existing in this South Asian region. So you can see how diverse this region is. So this is what we are going to learn in this unit 3. How this area, how this region is so diverse and so plural in nature. So diversity means variety. The idea of diversity may also be extended to connotations implied by differences and dissimilarities. So, in other words, conceptually, diversity stands for variety, differences, or dissimilarities prevailing in particular context of human or physical existence. So, there is differences, there is dissimilarities between people on the basis of all the you can say all the notions, all the kinds that we learnt in our previous slide. So closely related but not identical to the idea of diversity is the concept of pluralism. So diversity and pluralism are not, you can say it is not separate, but it is related to each other very closely. But there are also few differences between two. So pluralism stands for existence of many entities within a given sphere. So these entities may be diverse or not, but fundamental to the idea of pluralism is the existence of more than one or many actors in a particular arena. So pluralism is characterized by coexistence of different entities with one another in a way that nothing includes everything. So let's talk about the patterns of diversity and pluralism. So South Asia is a geographical entity well defined by natural formations, constructing its boundary with the rest of the world. So as I already discussed that there is a huge geographical variety we can find in this region. So there are many natural formations which is a very distinctive quality of South Asian region. Like we have Himalayas, which is a natural boundary. We have ocean, seas in this entire region. So the area consists of 8 countries with significant spatial variations. So all these 8 countries are different from each other and they have a various geographical and spatial variations. So the region is delimited by the Indian Ocean in the south and mighty mountain ranges of Himalayas, Karakoram and Pamir in the north. So it has totally landlocked countries like Afghanistan, Nepal and Bhutan. So as we know that landlocked countries are the countries which doesn't have any openings in the sea, so that they can have connections, they can have relations with other nations through that sea route. But there are also many countries in this region which are islands in island nations. So what are these countries which are island? That is Sri Lanka and Maldives. So in this region we can find landlocked countries in Afghanistan, Nepal and Bhutan, and also island nations like Sri Lanka and Maldives. Similarly, the ethno-cultural variations in the region are equally enormous, with majority of the countries presenting the example of multicultural society. So you can find that in all these 8 countries there is very less uniformity, but all these countries are basically and mostly the multicultural society, where there exist different types of cultures, multiple identities of people and different factors that bring together into a multicultural society. So, to define all these patterns of diversity and pluralism, let's start with the diversity of space. So, as the largest country in the region, India stands out as a distinct space where all kinds of geomorphologic formations are manifested in one part of the country or the other. So, in this diversity of space, let's talk about India, which is the largest country of the region. So, South Asia has 8 countries and India is the largest one. This is something you should remember. So, there are many geomorphological formations that consist of this country, India. So, in addition to India, Pakistan has also a lot of spatial diversity with many kinds of landforms and geographical formations. So, what are these geographical formations we are talking about in case of India and Pakistan? Basically, you can find Himalayan ranges, which is full of snow and strong cold winds in India, and also some parts of that exist in Pakistan. Also, you can find deserts, forests, beaches, and coastal lines, and different kind of geographical features in these countries. So, in addition to India, Pakistan also has many kinds of spatial diversity and the different kinds of landforms and geographical formations. Much spatial diversity is also visible in Afghanistan and Bangladesh, though not of the scale and dimension of India and Pakistan. So, in comparison with India and Pakistan, you can't find much of spatial diversity in case of Afghanistan and Bangladesh, but there are several. So, the two have distinct geographical features dominating much of their territories. So, there are subtle differences in topography and climate in certain pockets bear testimony to the spatial diversity. So, there are diversity in space and geographical formations in these 2 countries, that is Afghanistan and Bangladesh, but not that much as compared to India and Pakistan. The reason also is the area of their country, because India and Pakistan are very huge in their area. So that is why there are many kinds of diversity you can find in these countries. So South Asia is also composed of countries with their own unique spatial standing, which is quite uniform and monotonous at times. So Nepal and Bhutan are located at the main stretches of Himalayas, ordaining a unique mountainous geomorphologic formation in the main. So basically, Nepal and Bhutan are mountainous countries where there is mountains, Himalaya basically. So Nepal does have a large tract of plain land in its Terai region bordering India, Bhutan is primarily a hilly and mountainous country with very less variations in geography. So these two countries, Nepal and Bhutan, doesn't have much of its geographical diversity. Also because their land area is very small as compared to the other countries of the region. So the two countries are completely landlocked, having no access to open seas. But they took help of their neighbors, that is India. Mainly India helps them to access the open seas because they are landlocked. On the contrary to these countries, Sri Lanka and Maldives are island nations. So, on one hand, Nepal and Bhutan are totally landlocked, whereas Sri Lanka and Maldives are island nations covered with water from all the four sides, including the Indian Ocean. So, the two countries having isolation in their geographical existence, the topographical diversity within the landmass is bare minimum. So, Sri Lanka does have minor differences in its space in northern areas, but Maldives is having by and large a uniform geographical formation in its small landmass. Because of their area is small, as I told you earlier also, that is why the diversity is less to be seen. Now, let's talk about the plurality of culture and religion. So, this cultural plurality gives the region a fascinating, colorful look, which is not so much visible in many parts of the world. So, you can find commonalities in Europe, similar kinds of festivals, similar kinds of dresses, similar kind of food habits. But in this South Asian region, you can find plenty of different cultural pluralities across the region. So, South Asia's cultural diversity presents a medley which becomes a matter of joy and enjoyment, not only for its own people but also for the rest of the world. So, this region is so culturally diverse that you will find so many different practices to be happened, cultural events, festivals, food habits, culinary practices. There are so much differences, so much diversity. So the cultural plurality of the region is closely followed by the immense religious diversity, whose perfect example is manifested by India. So across this entire region, you can find religious diversity, but in India also, it itself is a huge diversity of religion. You will find Buddhist, you will find Jainism, who practice Jainism, and also you can find Zoroastrians, along with Hindu, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, etc. So you can find so many religion in this entire country and also the region. So the subcontinent has been the place of origin of a number of important religions of the world. So this region gave birth to many religions. Suppose, for example, Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism, and Jainism. All these four religions took birth in this entire country, specifically India. But we can say this South Asian region is something which gave birth to these four religions. Along with, there are also followers of Christianity and Islam in a sizable number present in the subcontinent. So you can find n number of religion could be found in this South Asian region. So, though overall religious diversity remains intact in the region, the same does not hold true regarding the internal situation in many of the countries. So, countries like India, Nepal, and Sri Lanka continue to be religiously plural societies with ample opportunities for followers of different religions to follow and practice their faiths. The same is not happened in the countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh. So, in these countries, there is extremist Islamists who have succeeded to a large extent in driving out or killing the believers of religions other than Islam. So, these three countries, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Bangladesh, they used to kill the believers of other religion apart from Islam. So, this is also happening in the internal happenings of this country, which is a very important point to notice. So, this is done in order to make their country exclusive preserve of Islam. So, these three countries are following this. But unsurprisingly, Bhutan and Maldives continue to be predominantly Buddhist and Islamic countries respectively. So Bhutan is predominantly Buddhist, whereas Maldives is predominantly Islamic country. Let's talk about the linguistic diversity. So, South Asia is also the hub of enormous linguistic diversity, unlike many other continents and peoples. So, like other diversities, India happens to be the country with most diverse language base in the region, as I discussed. So, India is home to languages like Sanskrit and Tamil that are considered as part of the earliest linguistic inventions in the world. So, Tamil and Sanskrit are considered to be a very ancient language, and you can find these two languages to be culminated in Indian land. So, it is therefore not surprising that almost all parts of the country are witness to its rich linguistic diversity. Remarkably, most of it, if not all, of these languages are extremely rich in having not only their own scripts but also a body of literature. So most of these languages have their own scripts and also the body of literature, which is a very rare thing you can find, basically because of the ancient languages which you can find here. So the 8th schedule of the Indian Constitution lists as many as 22 official languages. So Saraiki having large number of speakers, and also before the independence of East Pakistan and formation of Bangladesh, Bengali was also there. So Pakistan's linguistic diversity is also very vast. So for the rest of the countries, their linguistic diversity is confined to just 2 or 3 languages spoken by their people and recognized by their government. So apart from India and Pakistan, other countries have 2 or 3 languages to be spoken by their population. Sri Lanka recognizes Sinhala and Tamil as its official languages, which are also spoken by a substantial number of its population. So, when we were talking about Sri Lanka, we talked about 2 ethnic groups, that is Sinhala and Tamils. So, these 2 languages, Sinhalese and Tamil, are spoken in Sri Lankan by the Sri Lankan population. In Afghanistan, it is Pashto and Dari are the most important languages spoken by of its majority of the population. Now let's talk about the ethnic landscape. Ethnicities are also in a huge number you can find in this region. There is a diverse ethnic group you can find in this entire South Asia. So ethnic diversity in South Asia is as rich as other aspects of heterogeneous social and cultural life in different countries of the subcontinent. So the ethnic configuration in India is most bewildering in comparison to the other South Asian countries. So the ethnic diversity of Pakistan gets reflected in the major ethnic groups also we can find here. So Pakistan has also many ethnic groups including the Punjabis, Pashtuns, Sindhis, Saraikis, Muhazirs, Baloch, Pahadis, and Hind Kovans. So they are the major ethnic groups. There are also many minor ethnic groups that exist in the Pakistani land. So the ethnic configuration of Afghanistan is more resembling to the Central Asian ethnic groups prominent among the Pashtun, Hazaras, Tajiks, Uzbeks, Emaks, Turkmens, Nuristanis, Pashais, Durranis, Kochis, Pamiris, Gilgis, and Gurjars. So you can find so many ethnic groups in Afghanistan as well. Also, the major ethnic configuration of Bangladesh is drawn from the neighboring countries like India and Myanmar. So the ethnicity of the country consists of Bengalis, Chakmas, Marmas, Santals, Garo, Khasi, Khumi, Rohingyas, Tripuris, Kukis, Jummas, and Pankhos. So these are the ethnic communities you can find in Bangladesh. And similarly, pattern of ethnicity in Sri Lanka also is a combination of its native as well as groups of neighboring countries. So you can find Sinhalese, Tamils, Burghar, Vedas, Malayas, Chettis, Bharatas, and Pathans. So you can find so many ethnic diversity in Sri Lanka. So we will be continuing with Unit 4 in our next session. We are completed with 2 and 3. So unit 4 and unit 5 we will be completing in our next session. So thank you.